Our apologies for the technical interruptions there. E te iwi, e te ti, e te tā, e ngā iwi, e mātaki maina, kia ora, nau mai, and a very warm welcome to Kōrerorero. We begin an open Kōrerorero today with the following words. Tu tawa mai I runga, tu tawa mai I raro. Tu tawa mai I roto, tu tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. We open Kōrerorero today with a chant or prayer in the Indigenous Māori language from Aotearoa, New Zealand, that acknowledges each and every one of us that have joined Kōrerorero today. Kōrerorero originates from the Māori word kōrero, which means to chat, to converse, and to discuss what aligns with our session today. Kōrerorero is all about the conversations that matter, about what we join, and we have invited our panellists who will share their views, insights and opinions on international Indigenous education, a reflection on how Aotearoa New Zealand is setting international standards in Indigenous integration and inclusion. My name is Ed Tuari, Chief Advisor Māori for Education New Zealand, Manapō ki te ao. And now it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to today's moderator of Kōrerorero, Dr. Sarah Jane Tiakiwai. Sarah Jane Tiakiwai is currently the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Māori at the University of Waikato. Prior to taking up this appointment in April 2017, Sarah Jane spent 7 years as the inaugural Academic Director for the Waikato Tainui College for Research and Development. Sarah Jane has worked extensively in growing the capability and capacity of Māori and kaupapa Māori researchers, creating opportunities for Māori students to engage and to contribute to iwi development and Māori business nationally and internationally. Nā reira, kia ora, hola, Sarah Jane, and a very warm welcome once again, and over to you.
Kia ora, Ed. Tēnei te mihi atu kia tātou katoa e hui hui mai nei tēnei ata, I tēnei rā, I tēnei pōhoki. Aha koa nohea koutou mai ngā tōpito e whao te ao, tēnā koutou. Wonderful warm greetings from here in Aotearoa to all of you wherever in the world you may be. And thank you, nau mai, haere mai, welcome, boa tare, buenas tardes, everyone to our fourth and last Kōrerorero session. With these monthly online Kōrerorero sessions, Education New Zealand, with our New Zealand Inc. partners in the region, are seeking to provide a forum for the sharing of opinions and ideas, to engage with the thought leaders, to have conversations that matter. Connections between New Zealand and Latin America are strong, and these Kōrerorero sessions have been designed to create a space to build on the bilateral cooperation, collaboration and innovation that our regions are seeking to achieve together. I'll let the speakers introduce themselves in a moment, but first some housekeeping information for us all. For those of you joining us by Zoom, this webinar will be recorded and sent to you in the next couple of days. You can choose one of two options. For interpretation into either Spanish or Portuguese, just click on the globe at the bottom so you can change the audio. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box. Make sure you select the option to send your question to all panellists and attendees. Please make your questions in English. The chat option can be used for comments and reactions, but we won't be taking questions from within the chat, so please use the Q&A for that. If you need help or wish to be unmuted, please use the raise hand option. You will receive a certificate of attendance if your attendance is for at least 50% of the session in the next 10 days. Keep an eye on your email. For those of you joining us via YouTube, you can place your questions or remarks in the comments section. If you want to receive a certificate of attendance, please email latinamerica@enz.govt.nz between today and tomorrow so we can issue this certificate. Make sure you include your full name on the email. We'll be collating the questions as we go, and we'll ask the panellists a selection of questions at the end. It's my pleasure to give the word to each of the panellists to introduce themselves today. And I want to just remind our panellists, please, to just take no more than 2 minutes to introduce yourselves. And firstly, I will start with Professor Tania, Director of Te Ipukarea Language Institute, Te Ara Auaha, Faculty of Design and Creative Technologies, AUT University. Tēnā koe, Tania.
Tēnā koe, Sarah Jane. Tēnā koe, Ed. Tēnā koutou. Welcome to this webinar. I'm very humbled and honoured to be here. I am a professor in language revitalisation, and that's against over 30 years of working with communities and initiatives that are around empowering our communities to have the right access to language. I work at the university and lead a research institute within my dean's office at AUT, and we work on across a number of areas and technologies and creating resources as much as we can, free to access to our communities. Nō reira, tēnā tātou.
Ngā mihi ki a koe, Tania. Thank you for that, and also for setting the bar in terms of our introductions this morning. Nei rā te mihi ki a koe, Duane Grace. I would like to now introduce Duane Grace, the Chief Executive of Edusystems.
Kia ora tātou. So my name is Duane Grace, and I hark from 3 iwi here in Aotearoa, Ngāti Parau, Te Whānau Apanui, and Kaitohu. And I'm the CEO of a company called Edusystems, and that the work that we do is based around education technology within our Māori immersion sector, or our kura here in Aotearoa. And that personally is a history that goes back 20 plus years. We're working in this particular space. And to echo Tania's kōrero, I'd just like to thank the organisers for the invitation to this kōrerorero today. And a big welcome and hello to everyone that's attending as well. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Duane. I'd now like to turn to Natalie Lulia, who is the Māori Business Capes Project Leader from the University of Waikato. Morena, Natalie.
Morena, Sarah Jane. Kia ora everybody and greetings. I'd just like to, like my fellow panellists, to acknowledge everybody who is here today from wherever you are in the world, zooming in or watching on YouTube from. So yes, my name is Natalie Maramina Lulia. I hail from across the Pacific. So here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, I'm from Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Whakaue, and I'm also from Puka Puka and Achu in the Cook Islands, and a little island called Rurutu in French Polynesia. So yes, I currently work with the Centres for Asia Pacific Excellence, and I've had the honour and privilege of doing that for the last 2 years. In addition to that, I have worked and had the honour of working in the Māori business space, and had the opportunity to engage with Indigenous communities over the last 10 years. So yeah, look forward to this kōrero, and I'll hand it back to you, Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Natalie. It gives me great pleasure to provide some time now for our final panellist today, Dr. Moira Fortin. Kia ora, Moira.
Kia ora, Sara. Tēnā koe, Ed. Morena koutou. Yorana koru e te mahana nei. Buenas tardes a todos, a todas los que están viendo desde Latinoamérica. I will continue in English, sadly, but hey, this is how it goes. But my name is Moira Fortin Cornejo. I'm an actress and lecturer at the University of Otago in Languages and Cultures. And my contribution to this panel is from the area of the performing arts. I completed my PhD in theatre studies that looked into the interplay of traditional cultural elements into the creation of contemporary work within the Rapa Nui, Māori and Samoan cultural perspectives and backgrounds. As a performer and as a researcher, I'm very interested in bilingual theater and how language actually makes you change how you produce and perform physically, linguistically, and in terms of how the overall plays develop. So I've been fortunate enough to participate in a couple of bilingual plays and that have been presented around different festivals around New Zealand. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this Kōrerorero. I'm really looking forward to this discussion and to your questions. Thank you.
Tēnā koe Moira. I'll now turn the time over to our questions, and for our panellists, I'm going to start with a question for all. And just as I ask the question, I might just allocate an order for our panellists, so you've got some time to think. So firstly, I'll ask Tania to respond, then Duane, then Natalie, and then Moira. So the question for you all, given that our session is around international Indigenous education and what we here in Aotearoa are doing in regards to Indigenous integration and inclusion, is from your expertise and area of expertise, what's the main lesson learned that has allowed Aotearoa New Zealand to be a role model in Indigenous integration and inclusion in international education? I'll hand over to you, Tania.
Kia ora, Sarah Jane. I've thought about this this issue for a long time, and I want to locate my answer in the assertion of Māori leadership from 1840. Since the signing of a covenant called Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, which was an intention of partnership, of co-management, co-governance of land, seas, and people. So this assertion of Māori leadership is really, I wanted to acknowledge that since 1840, to look at revitalizing the Māori language and culture, with a particular focus, of course, that's leading into the Renaissance period from the in the 1970s. And I have to say the establishment of Te Kohanga Reo, which is saw the mobilization of people, communities, families, seeking to raise their children or have their children educated in an immersion context from within their preschool years. And this created, I believe, amongst Indigenous peoples, a huge awareness, a global awareness of how an Indigenous community, Indigenous people native to Aotearoa, New Zealand, have aspirations to have their children raised in Te Reo Māori, the Māori language. I think that there's a backdrop of that, and I think that this has taken us into a global context. There's two other points I'd like to make is that, you know, we're a few islands at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and for some of us like Natalie, myself, Pacific, I have ohana in Hawaii, the Cook Islands. And, you know, we all are voyagers. But for us, as Kiwis in New Zealand, we have a tradition of undertaking overseas experiences. So we go all over the world and have an awareness then of interacting with other ethnicities and cultures. That awareness includes, of course, the role of Indigenous people in our cultures. They become aware of that, having to leave home and then increase their awareness. And the last thing is, of course, I wanted to say is the recent focus by government in New Zealand on normalizing the language across all New Zealanders. And so with that comes industry the engagement of industry in a global world. So handing it back to over to Duane. Those are my thoughts in terms of where it's why we have got Indigenous education and inclusion in that international context.
Kia ora, Tania. I agree on a lot of what you've said. I think when it comes to integration and inclusion, our experience is all around Māori immersion schooling, so kura. And when you look at Māori immersion schooling here in Aotearoa, it's a very successful sector around student academic achievement, but also all of those other things that are important culturally to us. So when we talk about immersion schooling, we're talking about academic achievement, but we're also talking about those cultural values or ngā mātāpono that are inherent to us, the ways of being. And the success of immersion schooling comes from the fact that it's built on those philosophies, cultural frameworks, and ways of working, ways of doing that are inherently important to us. Now, the thing that runs alongside that, and it's your last point around initiatives that the government has worked to, but also kind of a wider societal one, is that with all the success of immersion schooling here, it's not only just restricted to kura or schools themselves, but we have a growing and a wider appreciation across all of Aotearoa that these Indigenous models, these things that work, are incredibly helpful. And I think it's because of that Māori has a place. I kind of hesitate a little bit to say role model, because in our experience and the work that we're doing in Hawaii, for example, there's always this idea of reciprocity when reaching out to other Indigenous cousins of ours. But to say that there are some incredible things that are happening here, and I think it keeps coming back to that as to why other parts of the world might look at what we're doing here, what Māori are doing, is because the schooling or Indigenous education programs that have been developed are ours, are inherently Indigenous Māori. And again, there's that kind of wider support across Aotearoa for that. And even in Education New Zealand, we saw the Tū Ngātahi, program that was developed. So we've even got this kind of wider appreciation of those cultural paradigms that are being implemented in other, you might say, non-Māori spaces. So for those reasons, I think Indigenous education is playing a leading role globally from here in Aotearoa. Kia koe, Natalie.
Yeah, really just to reiterate both of the comments so far. I definitely, for me, one of the biggest learnings is around leadership and Māori leadership, and like Tania alluded to, we have our whakapapa is a whakapapa of has a history and a legacy of connecting and exploring. So I think it is first and foremost an inherent connection that we have to engaging internationally. And I think, like Duane said, I think the immersion space, or you've got a large proportion of kids who have been through kura, who have been from, that are now the up and coming leaders. So you've got a larger proportion of, really grounded, strong rangatahi that are coming through, who I have a privilege to be able to work with in the programs that I deliver, and really inside of that, is this real opportunity. And like you, Duane, I'm also not on the kind of role model space, but I think, we were fortunate enough to, as part of one of the CAPES programs in 2018, we were over in Chile, and as part of that, the Māori All Blacks played in Chile at the same time. And so while we were over there, one of the things, I guess that we saw very quickly was the reputation that we as Māori have, and how we leverage or how we support our Indigenous whānau to provide a platform and a voice for them. And I think a lot of our tauira, a lot of the rangatahi that we had over there were just, I think, dumbfounded to think that, what, you don't have a voice. And again, there's pros and cons that come with everything, but I think in terms of looking at international education, I think the sooner we really get all of our rangatahi and our tamariki excited about, look, you're global citizens, and what does that look like and what does that mean? How do we together as a collective, as all Indigenous peoples, provide platforms for us to have a voice? And I'll stop there.
Just to thank you for that, Natalie. I'm gonna continue on your reflection, because as a Chilean myself, who I've known when people from New Zealand, especially Māori, have been in Chile, and because I lived so many years in Rapa Nui as well, I've been in touch with. I remember I was on the island in Rapa Nui actually, when Māori Ministry of Education, not sure who exactly, but people that were involved in the creation of Kura Kaupapa went to Rapa Nui, and after that meeting, the Rapa Nui Language Academy was created, and then the immersion program in Rapa Nui language was created on the island right there. So yes, indigenous cultures, and at least in Chile, from my experience, are aware of what is happening over here. And as a Chilean, what I saw basically was to see that from the whole institution, the Ministry of Education, or possibly the government, there was an acknowledgement and respect of other ways of knowing and being, in particular in my field, in the performing arts, but in performing arts in education. So core values, customs, rituals, and ways of being and ways of creating were embedded and are still embedded within the curriculum. So students can really use the best of both worlds, the Western methods and techniques, and transform them through their cultural background, sensibilities, opinions, languages, and many other instances into what is it that they need to create for theater, so they can use Western and Indigenous techniques, because both are taught. And this is something done consciously. So now that you mentioned the haka, it's not that they put a haka in the play because we need something Indigenous in there. They kind of like restructure what elements of the haka do we really need. Maybe it's just the introduction, maybe it's just one movement that we need to signify, I don't know, an image, or to enhance an image, or to signify a feeling or a thought within the play. So it's not just stuck there in blue tack. They are really part of the dramaturgy of the play. They're really well thought of. So, and to me, really, that's the beauty of it for me as a Chilean, that I'm learning these ways of not really including, but really embracing customs, rituals, because what they're doing is really creating and because it's really kind of like running parallel to the Western way of teaching, but you have the Indigenous way as well, strongly center in front of the curriculum. So what you're really doing is creating and teaching your students a way of working in the future. So whenever I meet with other practitioners now, and they've been to Toi Whakaari New Zealand Drama School, or to Whitireia, and they've done some haka kapa theatre papers, they start working with what they learn. So we have a hui, we have a mihi, we have poroporaki at the end, and we have different elements already embedded in the way in which they work. So it's not just learning for the sake of learning, it's creating a new methodology of working. And that's me, kia koe, Sara.
Thank you. Thank you. I think all of you have provided a really solid platform for the questions that follow. I think building on that, you know, around how embedded our culture is within where we are now, Tania, the question for you I have is, you know, your extensive experience and actually being probably at the coalface in the early stages, can you give some reflections around what revitalisation of Indigenous languages looks like, probably from the beginning, but how we've stepped up to today?
Certainly, and I'll try to do that within a very close time frame. I was fortunate to be born at a time where I was part of the birth of the Kōrerorero movement, the establishment of Māori language, what are called Māori language nests, and the delivery is an immersion. Interestingly, this movement was funded by what was called the Māori Affairs Department, or Department of Māori Affairs, and not education. And so you can immediately see that it's the platform from which it was established was outside of the education sphere. So our babies, I was not pregnant at the time, but I was enrolled doing my master's, so you can see how many years ago it was. And I was given access to many of these new initiatives. Some of these kohanga, as we call them, were emerged in people's homes, in old prefabricated buildings that were part of educational sites, in a range of church halls, community centres. It was a wonderful time of mobilisation of people, and the right as parents to choose an education for our children. I wanted to say that in that movement, over 30 years ago, we have this amazing swell of people that from that we began to discuss the importance of the establishment of further educational institutions for our children, to create the pipeline going through. So that's when kura, Duane's mentioned that, kura kaupapa, their primary schools, equivalent in elementary school level, right through to whare kura. So the work never stopped, and it never stopped. And I have to say I've gone a full cycle now, because I've never left the Kōrerorero movement in terms of my child grew up and out of that, but I've gone back to that because I have a mokopuna now, a grandchild, a little girl whose first language is Te Reo Māori. She's the first native speaker since 1881, since my great-grandparents, who were native speakers, in my family. So that's 139 years. So I think what I'm trying to tell you is that there is no quick fix to revitalizing languages. The success New Zealand has had is against that backdrop of 180 years since the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, of Māori leadership in communities, challenging successive governments about a range of issues, including, the loss of language, loss of land, assimilation policies, to more contemporary issues like mining, the land and the ocean floor. And that access to language is a human right. And I think that, so if we understand there's no quick fix, we have, but know that it's a multi-pronged approach. So from kohanga, we have other amazing groups that have been mobilized in broadcasting and television and radio, the right to have our own channels, the right to have, the revitalization and restoration of musical instruments through people like the late Hirini Melbourne, through to contemporary music, Māori music that our children all rap to and love in te reo. That makes us all happy. It's happy, it's great. And recognition at award ceremonies of compositions in te reo Māori, of the fine arts, the revitalization of language around it's tattoo, carving, weaving, outside of the educational initiatives, but we also have in the tertiary sector people like me who have fought for policies for a long time, to have policies where it's the right for our students to write all of their assignments in Te Reo Māori. And my son-in-law is an example of that, Dr. Dean Mahuta, who wrote all his assignments in Te Reo Māori and his theses, his master's, his dissertation, and honours and masters and PhD, all in Te Reo Māori. And I think that's another site of resistance in a traditionally conservative environment, a Western environment. And the lobbying that continues to go on of cultural trauma experience, protest movement, the use of technologies that Duane has talked about. You know, I want to cite some of those, like that is trying to normalize the language. You know, you've got Te Aka Māori Dictionary by the late John Moorfield. We have Kupu, the Kupu app. We have many apps and technologies that are accessible. But ultimately, everybody koutou, there's no substitute for raising children in your home from birth in their Indigenous language. You know, I've talked about my mokopuna. If it wasn't for my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents, in that whole 139 years, in your home, we have now a child who has been raised in Te Reo and can switch into English. And she also then uses her worldview with one of her grandmothers to say, when she uses a word like tiwanawana, you know, akumakawe, that my hair is messy. So, you know, can we do it? Tiwanawana. What is tiwanawana? How tiwanawana? Messy, mama. So it's like, you know, they're able to translate between these two languages. And she's just turned 3 on the 1st of December. So for me, that's the journey, Sarah Jane, from, you know, 30 to 35 years ago. I've been privileged as a mother born into the Kohanga Reo, moving into kura kaupapa and staying in these movements, because once you're there, you're born as an Indigenous woman, a mother and a grandmother. I'm lucky. I've always wanted to be a grandmother, and I am. And I'm still there. It's a cyclic movement. You never leave, and you continue to add voice and substance in a different age level to that movement across multiple sites, because there's a language associated with each of these areas of protest. So I hope I've covered that for you. I want to sort of say by a mihi to all of those, to everybody in the movement, wherever they may be, in composition and music, performing arts, you know, raranga, weaving, tattoo, you know, which is good, you know, tatau and in Pacific languages as well, uhi in some languages. But, you know, all of these things are around identity markers that are around taking back, reclaiming the right to be Indigenous. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tania. Just on that last point, I think that those markers and taking that right back to be Indigenous, and I guess thinking about the digital age that we now live in. So this is my segue to you, Duane, you know, and how we can use the technology around us to look at reclaiming and integrating and including who we are unapologetically as Indigenous. So you lead an innovative global team to support Indigenous learning worldwide. What are your reflections on the use of technology and particularly in the support of advancing social transformation for Indigenous EdTech education?
Yeah, kia ora, Sarah. I love this question because the question is around how does technology advance social transformation, and in this case through Indigenous EdTech, and I think that's the right question. Education and technology are the two biggest levers of change, and that's what makes EdTech so exciting. And so in our particular example, we've been developing technology to support, and is based on Māori immersion schooling. So in this case, being able to recognize the genius in every particular child, being able to personalize learning based on those interests, talents, and strengths of our rangatahi, of our students. And critically, being able to embed our cultural practice within the whole learning experience. And I can't take any credit for that. That's what our kura and people like Tania that have set those foundations have got us to. So where we kind of see more our role, and not just us, but as Tania was alluding to, a number of different kind of technology groups in New Zealand, our role is to say, how do we then take technology and support this? And it's a much bigger picture than a technology that you might just have to teach you how to count in a classroom. It's always thinking about that bigger kind of social advancement picture. So in short, the technology to get to that social transformation, it has to be holistic, because that's the way we are. We look at the holistic parts of an education for a child. So that's the academic achievement, but the wellness of the child, the cultural components as well. It needs to be innovative to support some of the cultural teaching and learning practices, and those again evidenced in our kura, which is why they get the result they do. And importantly, again, being able to engage that family and the wider community. So, engaging the village, the whānau, the wider community groups that all have a stake or responsibility in that child's success. So social transformation in this way, it's kind of driven out of two places. One, that we have capable, confident, and engaged students that go on to lead successful lives and contribute well to society. But also, just as importantly, because of that, the benefits, the positive benefits that come from that around that connected family or those other connected groups. And we're currently working with a number of iwi here in Aotearoa with some of our tribes to create that connect between school, family, iwi, other, to engage that village. And so we hear the phrase, technologies an enabler all the time, and this is kind of like a practical example of that. But to be an enabler, the key, coming back to your question of how technology is used, it again comes back to this design kind of piece again. And for us, technology has to have an impact model in Indigenous. So, the impact model, again, in our kind of experience is around engaging that village, bringing the family and wider community along for the ride. And if you can do that, if the technology supports an impact model, and in this case through our Indigenous schooling, then you get that social advancement. The other parts of technology that we know about, and this is again the great bit to it, is that it provides flexibility. You're able to customize easily, and quite importantly as well, you're able to scale. So how does technology support social advancement through Indigenous EdTech? I think it's very much about being able to design and purpose that technology to support those Indigenous paradigms or Indigenous models that we know work. I think that's the answer more so than being able to create applications that might be able to teach you how to count. Ko tāku nei whakaaro. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Duane. Thank you for that. A point that you made around, technology as a tool or an enabler, and I guess really about how we can create connected families, families that are connected to schools, that are connected to villages, or, in our case, the Indigenous world. I might just turn to you now, Natalie, and thinking about the work that you're doing in the business space, which I guess is a different type of tool. It's more not so much around social transformation, but economic opportunities for our Indigenous peoples. And just reflecting on the work that you have done in this space, where you're working with the future generation of Māori business leaders, how do you see Indigenous to Indigenous engagement as a way of growing business linkages between Aotearoa New Zealand and Latin America?
Hi, Sarah. Look, I think firstly to acknowledge actually both what Tania and what Duane's spoken about actually is what's given rise to the type of, I guess, Māori leader that's showing up currently. You know, for that, given, you know, I have had the privilege of spending a lot of time with the next lot of Māori business leadership coming through, and, you know, they're a generation unto themselves. They're ready, they're keen, they're able, and, you know, they come into conversations talking about impact. They're, you know, super reflective, but also just, you know, ready to go. I find myself trying to keep up with them most of the time. But, you know, I think for me, one of the key things that, you know, I've really found, and it has come like from what Tania has spoken about, is that, you know, this type of leadership's, it's intergenerational. And so the connections that are being made now have actually always been there. So it's a matter of just continuing to provide platforms where the connections come together. So, you know, I know for me, you know, privileged off the back of the hard work that's been done over the last, you know, 180 to thousands of years, off of the back of all of that, I get to be who I am in this generation. And that's also too, I guess, where I look with working with the leaders that are coming through, is they also, you know, we get the privilege to stand on the shoulders of giants. And for that, you know, it's an honor and a privilege to do that. And, you know, one of the things from an Indigenous business connection point of view, one of the big things that I've seen as well is, because you're building relationships like that, the level of engagement requires no contracts and no agreements. That's person to person, and it's strong. So, you know, for me, in terms of, you know, what's there, I mean, there's so much, there's everything to gain and nothing to lose from my perspective in terms of, you know, the space we work in. And, you know, one thing too is what I'd love is to see our rangatahi speaking in forums like this. And the earlier and sooner we have that embedded in what we do socially, and what's within our skills, which is all the hard work that's already being done. You know, it's not a matter of, oh, one day I hope I would travel. They have it part of their life already. And, you know, technology's played a massive part in that. And so for me, you know, it's how do, in the mahi that I'm doing, you know, how do we provide platforms where those connections can be made? And again, not to force it to go anywhere, but just to let it thrive. Because, yeah, you have some very, very intelligent, incredible leaders coming through, you know, that will continue to sustain meaningful and authentic relationships. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Natalie. Your point about, you know, meaningful and authentic relationships. This is a question, I think, for you, Moira, particularly how you use performing arts as a way of connecting Indigenous peoples from Rapa Nui to New Zealand, but also that you've done, you know, work with Samoan theatre and the role of theatre education in the production of contemporary Indigenous plays. How do you think Latin American countries can implement or use performing arts as a way of connecting Indigenous peoples, and also not just with Indigenous to Indigenous peoples, but Indigenous peoples to other societies?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, we've been talking about tools here as well. Technology, theater is also a tool, and it's mostly about storytelling. So, and when it comes to storytelling, it's not always about the aesthetic, how the play looks, but about the content. So theater gives this massive opportunity for Indigenous people. Not only Rapa Nui, I live there, I'm only speaking from my experience, but Mapuche, Mara, and all the other Indigenous communities that are in Latin America, that it gives them the opportunity to tell their own stories, to their own communities. I'm remembering now how Roma Potiki, Māori theatre practitioner, created a play in the early 90s, Whatungarongaro, which was a community theatre play, which means that a community devised a play, rehearsed it, and they performed the play to the same community that the play came from. And these people were not actors, they were not trained actors, so they learned on the doing. And then after the play was done, it was a conversation where the audience could talk and ask questions to the performers, how was the process, or discuss issues, and little by little, kind of not really solving any problems if there were any, but kind of like reflecting on issues that the play presented. So the idea of telling your own stories in your own language from your own cultural background is massive. And through that, you can engage and share and compare, not to compare who's better, but compare, they're doing it like that. Oh, we're doing it like that. How about we combine? New play. So then you start working with other peoples and sharing ideas and sharing worldviews. And possibly, why not, learning some little bits and pieces of language. So I think theatre gives, from an Indigenous perspective, it gives like a really strong sense of self-determination, because they, by learning, Western and Indigenous techniques and methods, and then by choosing how to do it, they're actually determining what we want to say, how we want to say it, to whom we want to say this, and with whom we would like to collaborate. So there's no longer people coming out of your community and telling like, no, this is how it should be done. And then you go like, no, this is our way of doing it. This is our way of telling stories. It might be body painting, it might be string figures, it might be songs, dances, or text. And then slowly, by little, people get trained in the craft. So I think theater it's a massive opportunity and in a really useful tool. It might be redundant saying it, but it's worth remembering that it's an oral art. So the revitalization of language is huge through theater, and it doesn't have to be massive big plays, because sometimes people think like, but we're not trained. It doesn't matter. Just tell your story from your own world, and then you will have people joining in, and I think that's a really interesting way of how different Indigenous communities can share different issues, different ideas. And well, if you look within the Polynesian world, the Festival of Pacific Arts, that is every 4 years, includes storytelling and includes theater as one of the performances that are there for everybody to share. And then you see plays from New Caledonia, Samoa, New Zealand, and in different languages, some in Māori, some in English, some in French, some in their Indigenous language as well. And it's really interesting to see, because you always can find points of connections. I mean, we're all humans, we have different worldviews, but basically it's very impressive and kind of like, kind of like heartwarming to see like, they face the same issues as we do, although we're literally on the other side of the world. So I think, it's a great tool. And I think it's because it's based on storytelling, and it's theater basically, and it's based on, and it's very translatable from an oral culture. When you tell your own stories, when your granddad told you old stories, that's very translatable into theater. So it's a tool that I've seen being applied at schools in Rapa Nui. In my case, I've seen it apply here in New Zealand, in different ways. Children completely deconstructing a story to create their own version of that story, and getting others' ideas and presenting other issues through the narration of a traditional story by creating a new one, and then presenting challenges with technologies, but they started from the platform, the springboard that is the tradition, and then they created something else. So it's not really fixing it. And I think that's a really good point as well, because it's moving away from this perspective that the dominant culture has, that the indigenous cultures needs to be fixed and they need to repeat because they need to provide some sort of entertainment for the colonial power. And it's like, well, no, indigenous cultures are allowed and capable and very able to create new things, new plays, new songs, new performing arts, and recreate them accordingly to the times, and reflect upon all sorts of issues: land loss, loss of language, businesses, the I don't know, I'm just thinking the impact of technology, tourism, and all sorts of things within their community. So I think, yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Moira. I think one of the challenges when we're talking Indigenous is that, it is so complex, it's so connected, but equally our Indigenous ways of expressing ourselves can sometimes stretch across our timeframes. So I'm going to pull ourselves in, but firstly, thank you to our panellists. There's been a series of questions which have a common theme, and I might actually start with you, Natalie, briefly. I know we've only got a few more minutes left, but the theme is really coming through about how do we maintain connections across Indigenous communities, exchanges and so on. And the question is probably more in the context that we're in a COVID environment. How can we do this authentically using technology, and what examples might you have that could help our whānau who are participating to figure out what that might look like? So I'll start with you, Natalie. Just brief answers, please.
Yeah. Ka pai. So actually, it's probably come at good timing. So this year, so part of the CAPES program that I run it's called Te Hononga Ākiwa, and we have an opportunity with all of the Centres for Asia Pacific Excellence, so Southeast Asia, North Asia, and Latin America, to deliver this program across all three of those regions. Of course, with COVID this year, it's a mobility-based program, so it would usually involve us travelling over to engage with Indigenous communities overseas. But because of COVID this year, we weren't able to do that. And actually, we've just spent the last month engaging over Zoom. And actually, one of the things that I have noticed, and I guess a more general sense, is actually it's probably been a lot easier to do it. One of the things that technology has provided us, or the COVID context has provided us, is that when you are travelling overseas to engage, you may be in country for maybe 10 or so days, and you are actually restricted by the geographical space in which you can travel in that much time. However, over the last month, we've been able to get all four corners of a country. We've been able to engage in particular with whānau in Brazil, across the top in the Amazon, all through the major cities. And actually, so from that, in terms of that question, Sarah, so how do you stay connected? Actually, it's quite easy. We thought, yes, there's some challenges, but actually it's quite easy. And what the Kōrerorero is about, it's not just for this year Kōrerorero. Actually, we're talking about what we want to create together in partnership going forward. So when the borders are open, we'll be ready to go. And that's the most exciting part of things like that. But of course, just to put there, because I only got a couple of minutes, if anyone is interested in knowing more about what we do with the Centres for Asia Pacific Excellence, please do feel free to get in touch with me. Kia ora.
Thank you, Natalie. Tania, I saw you nodding your head quite a bit there, so I'll pose that question to you now.
I only want my nodding was to tautoko, Natalie, that the downside of COVID is that it has some ramifications in terms of not being able to do what we do well as Indigenous and naturally be in person, to exchange, to share ideas in that in person in Atinana. So COVID has forced us in a way onto the screen, and using Zoom and Teams and these technologies to have those conversations. So all is not lost. For example, you know, I had to can a trip to the Mapuche in the south of Chile this year with my dean, because they have an accord with universities, and also Chile government now is looking at ways in which Indigenous peoples have to be included. And so it was around providing that experience. So, you know, my thinking around that is like, you know, we might be able to be there, but we can be there in another space. And Natalie is already doing that. And it's like a lesson. Let's connect. It's not the best. It's not the best way, but it means then that at least we can continue these conversations. And I think that's the important thing, Sarah Jane, that the conversations don't stall. So we need to be brave and set up these technologies effectively so we can still have our what we do best, and that's sharing, you know, in manaki tangata. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tania. Moira, what does that mean for you, particularly in the performing arts space?
Sorry. Well, you will have to repeat the question because at this point I'm already lost it. Sorry.
Oh. So the question was really, how do we maintain these Indigenous to Indigenous connections, particularly given the constraints that we have with physical travel? So how do you think for performing arts?
Yeah, that's a tricky one in terms of performing arts, because it's like, well, it's very difficult. I tried it, but it's very difficult to do theater via Zoom. And it's just awful because it becomes really bad television. But perhaps in terms of, as Tania was saying, we just need to meet in this space and share our experiences and say, well, I tried this or I tried that, and just talk things through. It's like when you start creating a play that you sit for a month reading a play and talking about the characters. In the same way, we can sit down and talk about, well, how was it done here? What techniques did they use? What books did they read, or who did they talk to? And maybe they can translate those ideas into their community, especially if we're working with, in New Zealand, if someone is working with a Matua, which is the elder or someone taking care of that things are done correctly. So we can say, well, you need to talk to someone that understands theater or understand your idea, and then run those ideas through and then see how you can translate those into theater, because it's not that you put the whole ritual there, you need to translate them into the theater world. So I think just for now, it's just talking and kind of like theorizing about how things could be done once we can meet in person. And getting ready to kind of like, okay, we're going to participate in this festival or whatever in 2022. But now is the time to think, reflect, write, create over there, and connect with other people via Zoom to see, hey, we're lost here and we need some advice. Okay, run me through, what is it that you're doing? How are you stuck? How can I help you from afar? Literally in every sense of the word. And then once we're ready to travel, we meet and see, and then we talk again in person and analyze or reflect on the work we just saw. But I think that's the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Moira. And finally to you, Duane. We've been talking a lot about engaging through technology. So your thoughts?
Yeah, we're really fortunate, and I've explained kind of the technology that we've been developing with immersion schooling here, Kura, because right now we're working with a group in Hawaii. It was always the intent from day one. So that the technology platform or the schooling technology that's been modelled here in Aotearoa within the next 2 weeks will be in Kaipuni in Hawaii. We're also starting to talk with groups in Australia, and the reason I think I go back to that impact model that we spoke about before is that we see ourselves as one part of an Indigenous global community, that's inherent to us. When we talk about whakapapa and our genealogy and connecting, we can connect all the way back to the Pacific. And so in terms of how do we connect, technology for us is that enabler. And so in practice, what does that mean? It means working with our other Indigenous cousins through Zoom, yes, but being able to leverage the technology platforms that have been developed to literally put that technology into a kaipuni in Hawaii. That's exactly what we're talking about. And it's very much a two-way learning process. We see through reciprocity, through respect, through cultural kind of lenses, how there will be changes in each particular case, because whilst there's so much of us that is the same, and someone said that on the panel, there's the little tweaks, there's the practical tweaks, that this is how education is done in Hawaii as against this is how education is done in Australia and state of New South Wales and that type of thing. But ultimately, the vision, the want for change, the social transformation, all of those things are much it's the same anywhere around the world. So for us, that use of technology to connect, that absolutely is a connect, and it has a level of Zoom where this is how we talk to our Hawaiian cousins. We're on Zoom. In practice, though, it's taken it that step further to be able to use technology to learn from each other and to make that social change and transformation that we're all looking to make.
Kapai. Thank you, Duane. I'm getting messages to start doing a final wrap up. So I might give this opportunity for the final word or one final reflection from each of our panelists. And Moira, I might start with you if that's all right.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the whole conversation. It has been very interesting. Maybe you see me moving around because I'm taking notes like a maniac, and gathering ideas, information, and answering to some of the comments or that we got in the chat. I think yes, we can meet with through this environment, this virtual environment. But as Duane was speaking, I was thinking there are lots of Indigenous cultures that and communities that are not as fortunate as having good internet connection or access to technology. Even in Rapa Nui, sometimes internet is slow that you cannot even send a short email. So I think it's a great space for talking, for sharing, but I just hope COVID goes away ASAP and we can go back to meeting in person, because for me, as a performer, I mean, that's what I like. I like theater because I have the connection with people. I get the immediate reaction. I can talk to them. I can share my art with them, and I can learn from them as well. So it's the sharing. It's the personal sharing that I'm really interested in through the performing arts, through theater, through dance, through whatever. So for me, this environment does not really suit me. But hey, we work with what we have, and we use every single tool we have available to communicate, to share stories. And that includes, of course, the topic that we're discussing here. We're using everything that is available from to be able to communicate. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Moira. Duane, I might ask you to come in with your final reflection.
Yeah, my final thought is that we're in a really exciting time. It's an exciting time for Indigenous, and that's both here in Aotearoa and around the world. And if anything that's going to help that, it is those connections that we're talking about. Kia ora.
Wonderful. Nice and pithy, I love that. Natalie.
Oh, you stole all my words. No, yeah, just want to reiterate that. I think, yeah, for me, just in closing, yeah, look, there is a real shift, there's a real transformation that's brewing currently. And yeah, I think for me, it's just, you know, who are you going to be about that, you know? And that's a question to myself. Who am I going to be about that? What is it going to take for me? Who do I have to be in order to, you know, to really allow that to grow? So one, a challenge to myself, but to everyone here listening today, you know, thank you so much for being on here and allowing us to share. I mean, again, you know, who are you going to be about the kōrero we've just had, you know, and I challenge you to share it with 3 other people today, something you got out of it, because unless we keep talking, yeah, things will just stay where they are. So kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And to you, Tania, you started our session, so I thought it appropriate that you have the final word for our session.
Tēnā tātai, tēnā koe, Sarah Jane. To all of you, I can see from the chat, you are doing amazing work behind the words that you've shared with us, even acknowledging you know, the panel and our participation today. I just want to encourage you that keep doing that good work. It's not easy. It takes a village, but it also takes generations. And I want to end with the word hope. Hope that we can achieve the dreams of our forefathers and our foremothers and our ancestors from many moons ago. And that we, I have evidence within my own family through my Helani, my little mokopuna, my granddaughter, that the hard work begins in families. And if you can find that and do that within your families to transform families and take that into community, then, you know, she's living evidence of, she's baking bread at the moment with my mother, her great-grandmother. I think that hope is important and it's powerful, because it's a way to a spirit that burns in you, and you think, gosh, every day I wake up to her and she's my hope for better conditions. I look at Natalie in her eyes and I think, my gosh, I'm so proud of you as a young, amazing scholar, doing the work that you know, I can die well now, and knowing that you have already said you need to pay it forward. You have acknowledged people's work from the past, hard work, and you're actually you're carrying on that journey and making and making new footprints for others to follow. So to all of us here, I'm grateful to Sarah Jane and her leadership facilitation today. Ed and Harvey and people behind the translators, behind the scenes, who are providing this narrative. And of course, maybe more kōrerorero in 2021. That's my hope, because this sharing is so critical for us in lieu of being able to touch hands and reach out to each other in person. So those are my thoughts and ending thoughts to all of us here today. We fight the fights that need fighting, and don't give up. Never give up. Always keep hope at the forefront. Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou. Tēnā koe, Tania. Tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be a part of Kōrerorero today. I've seen Ed come back on screen, and so I will now hand the time back to him. But anō nei te mihi kia koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Sarah Jane, and to our panelists, just a lovely pause there. Wow, what an amazing 75 minutes. I would rather have 75 days to listen to such an enriched and powerful conversation. But tēnā koe, Sarah Jane, for a remarkable job. And to our panelists on behalf of Education New Zealand, Manapo ki te ao, we sincerely thank you, one, for agreeing to join, but enriching and sharing your perspectives on Kōrerorero today. And we also thank our participants who took time to join us globally. The feedback has been just astounding. There are two things I'd like to leave you with, and one of them would be a few lines from a song that was composed by Te Kumeroa Ngoi Ngoi Pē Whairangi from Te Whānau Arua Taupare Ngāti Porou and Ngāti Koi of Hauraki, which refers to not only the language but the noble teachings of our ancestors. And she wrote, "Whiua ki te ao, whiua ki te rangi, whiua ki ngā iwi katoa," which translates as disseminate it to the world, give it to the heavens, and share it amongst everyone. And for me, that is exactly what we have done this morning. But without further ado, I also conclude with the following karakia e hikama. Kia tau te rangi Māori o te rangi e tui honei. O papatua nuku e takoto nei, o te taiao e awhi nei ki runga i a tātou. May the peace of the sky above and the earth mother below and the all-embracing universe rest upon us all. Haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. Kia tau te uruhau, kia hānea nea te noho, kia marutau te haere. May joy and happiness surround you, may contentment shelter you, and may your journeys of hope and aspirations take you where your hearts want to go. Nā reira, happy festive season. Hei ko nā mai for now. Kia ora, gracias, and thank you. Tēnā tātou.
This is Pounamu, a precious stone drawn from pure waters. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, it is regarded as a taonga, a treasure of strength, beauty and spiritual value. This Pounamu stone is carefully crafted by its carver. As it takes form, its twist design called pikorua emerges. It's inspired by the piko fern whose fronds curl around one another, symbolising the connection of cultures and the importance of friendship. Pounamu can be gifted, and this one is a gift from Aotearoa New Zealand to our international students. It's an expression of unity because when we stand together, we all flourish. It's designed to connect the wera to Aotearoa New Zealand, reminding us how important it is to support each other and to acknowledge the learning and friendship between us. For our international students as we step into our futures together, tū ngā tahi, we stand together.
Nice.